All right. Thank you all for coming to hear the webinar of Introduction to Space Utilization Analytics for Workplaces. So we are going to be talking about how space utilization data is used in the context of workplaces. My name is Ari Kepnes. I am the Director of Market Research at Density, and we're here as well with Rob Grazioli, Head of Product Design. And he is also at Density. We're in two different locations, so we're going to try to handle logistics smoothly and hand off in the middle of this conversation, and hopefully it will go well. So first off, I want to thank you guys all for taking the time, whether it's just after lunch or in the morning, to join us. And really, thank you so much for your time. As a thank you, we are going to be giving away Amazon gift cards if you stay for the whole duration of the 20-minute presentation and questions, and if you meet the requirements that were sent earlier. So today we are going to talk a little bit about who we are at Density, just for some context. Then we are going to go into the importance of utilization data. It's a buzzword that has been talked about a lot in this industry, and we're trying to decode it and then talk about how it actually applies to specific problems. That's the analytics presentation that Rob is going to be leading. And then we are going to take your questions. So a Q&A after about 20 minutes. To give us your questions, please look for, there is a Q folder, either the bottom or the top of your screen. So please select that, and then you can post anonymously or not. We would love it if you, we encourage you not to post anonymously, but if you would like to, please feel free. So we are Density. We were founded in 2014, and we have received funding from the same companies that have also supported Facebook, SpaceX, and a lot of the big companies in the Bay Area where we are located in San Francisco. Our team has a history from Microsoft Connect, Apple, SAP, and we all came together because we have created the new platform, the new data platform for the connected workplace. And we use a people counting technology, which we'll talk about in the second half of the presentation, that enables organizations to measure efficiency between their two largest assets, people and the workplace. So we believe that the future of work is a world in which the people and the environment that they are in are both measured and help to drive efficiency in a workplace. Some of the ways that we are understood by our clients is that we help them make better decisions with data. And so we're going to talk about what that means in the context of the workplace. So I'm going to start off by with this metaphor of Goldilocks. So why would Goldilocks be a good story for utilization data? Well, in the story of Goldilocks, she visits all these different types of environments. She goes into the different beds, she tries the different porridge, and there's this kind of allegory tale here about how in order for her to find the right match, the right size, the right environment, she had some feedback between her and the physical world. And that was how she was able to find what was just right. And this is a story that somehow, for many ways, we forget when we talk about the physical world that we work in or the physical environment that we built. But it's a good reminder, and it's also a tale of the empathy that's required to really understand as a user, that one environment may not be right for everyone, and it's important to measure how people interact with the physical world. In that context, to be an effective workplace, there's this balancing act between both efficiency and experience. So obviously, if everyone could had no restraints, then there would be a whole world in which it was all about the employee experience. And we're seeing that more and more, specifically as companies realize that there's so much value in the employee experience in terms of productivity. We've seen a 45% increase, according to a CBRE report, in companies and workplace teams that are focusing on employee experience. But there's also this whole aspect of efficiency and an efficiency-driven kind of smart building, savings mindset. And that's something that is not going away. because efficiency is something that really is important to operationalize across huge portfolios, and it's a primary driver of corporate real estate and workplace teams, even though there is this tension, this balancing act between experience and efficiency. So traditionally, I would argue, and some of the research that I've done has shown that this search for right-sized real estate, this balancing act between efficiency and experience, often fails. And just some quick notes on that. The cubicle that we live in today is really a product of the Action Office from Herman Miller, which was designed for all about experience. You have a range of desks, what you're seeing on the top right, that you'd have a place to go to sit, to stand, to take a call. But what happened was they took those same modular panels and made them only about efficiency and cramming people in. Same thing is happening with the open office. It was designed to have a variety of spaces. There's a great op-ed in Work Design about why the conversation about open offices has not really taken into account why offices that were open from the beginning were meant to serve. And so that's kind of an interesting thing here. We see this interplay between efficiency, experience, and how often it fails. And I will argue, and what we've seen, that the reason why is because there isn't a feedback loop, that there isn't real data that is driving some of these key decisions. And 83% of corporate real estate execs, this is from a Gensler study, say that space utilization is the top metric for decision making. Meaning, if you want to balance the beauty and the whole experience that's about giving people what they need when they want it, with the pragmatic efficiency mindset, you need to measure how they're actually using the resources that you're allocating. And it's that simple. So once you understand how are people using space and how is space being utilized, and I'm defining that as an understanding of how is a space being used, how many people are in a space versus how many people could be in that space, how are they using the space. You can reduce costs. Again, as I've mentioned, you can simplify space planning, and you can validate needs. We're seeing more and more of this. We work with some of the large companies now that are actually testing and validating how are my spaces being used. And so in terms of how this all ties together, there's two major problems that we're seeing today. One is underutilization and one is unmet needs. And so the problem with not having an understanding of both efficiency and experience is that you end up building a lot, but building space that isn't being used or being used in the right way. 40% of corporate real estate is empty but paid for. And then on the other hand, you have unmet needs. So people who go to work may not be satisfied because you're giving them a lot of resources, but their experience isn't great. And so these two problems, they're really the low-hanging fruit in this world of corporate real estate in the workplace that we're seeing space utilization be applied for. As that context, I'm going to hand it off to Rob, who will talk a little bit more about how this data is being used with actual real problems in the world. All right, Rob?
Cool. Thank you, Ari. Okay, so I'm going to run through 3 examples of some of our customers using this data to make decisions at a couple of different levels of their portfolio. So we'll start at sort of the one of the smallest levels, which is the conference room, and talk about how one of our customers managed that particular project there. We'll then jump up to larger spaces like floors or cafes and talk about how account data is relevant for planning better. And then I'm going to give you guys a sneak preview of an application we're working on with some select customers to manage their higher level portfolio. This particular customer took a workspace that originally had 7 individual offices, as in one person used them, and they converted them into team rooms for a new labs team that they were spinning up. And this is an agile development team, so they elected to use a one-size-fits-all approach, thinking that these teams would have their stand-ups, they'd have individual meetings, one-on-one meetings, phone calls, and so on, and that this would be enough space for each one of those teams. But shortly after they did this, they started receiving requests for more space. Obviously, the goal is to give employees what they need, but they had a mandate, a company-wide mandate that said no more real estate. we've kind of hit our people per square foot number. We don't really want it anymore. So they went out to collect some data, and a lot of the data looked like this, looked how it should. You kind of had these morning meetings that were upwards of 8 people, and then you sort of see that balance out over the course of the day, with the maxes and the mins ranging between a reasonable meeting size. But a lot of the other rooms looked like this, where you really weren't seeing the size of that room being used properly. And ultimately, this led to a pretty simple decision. They actually wound up taking 3 of these rooms, cutting them in half, and making them more suitable for one-off conversations or phone calls, and ultimately moved that into implementation. And again, gave the employees what they need. This was much less about optimizing the space, but mostly giving employees a space they actually needed, which were more smaller rooms to take smaller meetings. So at the next level up, we're working with a high traffic space here, and this particular team was looking to reduce waste in their cafeteria. And previously, they had been planning on a set number of visitors or attendees a week, and they were going off of plate counts. So they installed density to get a more accurate and complete picture of the week. And it turns out they were planning on sort of this, again, the same amount every day. And what we were able to do is actually predict out into the future for the next week, so they could go into weekly cycles and actually plan accordingly and make adjustments on their inventory, so they were reducing waste. And then I think what's obvious here is Friday was slower days. So Friday, they were planning for Friday to be the same day as every other day, when there was a significant enough decrease that may result in different quantities. And then we're also working to expose this data to the employees themselves so that they can make better decisions about going to lunch. Now, going to lunch for these companies is very much about collaboration and sort of impromptu meetings for people. But at times, if it was just too busy, it would take up too much of their time, and people weren't getting the experience they were looking for. And then lastly, we're working with again, select customers to sort of map out their portfolios at large. And again, it's just an easier way to sort of look at things at a larger scale. We're also developing more simplistic ways to interpret this data. Again, different buildings and different rooms have different contexts and different goals. So we're trying to streamline a way to sort of measure buildings next to each other. And then just developing easier ways to sort of navigate through these spaces and just point out sort of obvious areas in which you may want to look into how the space is being used specifically. If you're interested in trying this, you can reach out to us directly, and we're happy to get more feedback. I'll pass it back to you, Ari.
Great. So I will just share this as well now. One moment. So I think one of the things that I was most surprised by is that in order to get that data that Rob was talking about here, in terms of these large Fortune 500 companies who are making huge decisions for their resources, whether it's food or space or something like that, it's not easy to collect utilization data. So we've talked a lot about the problem and why it's important, but to actually understand how are humans interacting with the physical world, it's a challenge because they do weird things. They hide between hinges. They walk in different directions. They carry objects. They wait outside of doors for conference rooms if it's full. And that all means that to actually understand how they're using space, it's not a very easy technical challenge. And so what we did in our approach is, on the left, it looks like a heat map, but it's actually a topographical 3D scan of the space below it. So our device that we have spent many years building, both on the hardware side and the algorithm side, is able to see on the left, recognize that there's 3 people that are leaving, now 4, and on the right, it is able to abstract away all of the noise and accurately count how many people have left the space. Now, we're using words like count utilization data, count people count, but I want to just summarize all of that is to say that when you understand how many people are in a specific place, you obviously understand how are they using the space. And one thing that is kind of interesting here too is that we really haven't had in terms of technological advances, the ability to do this type of thing without the advances in computer vision and machine learning, AI. Those are all buzzwords, but it's helpful to start to think about, okay, when a computer can actually train itself to recognize an object, and then improve how accurately it's able to detect that object, that's a really great way of thinking about applications for machine learning and AI. And one of the things that you'll note here is that you can't see any personally identifiable information. So we're living in a world where privacy, GDPR, especially in the workplace, is really heating up. And our approach is to be both accurate in terms of how many people are using a space, but then also anonymous. And that's something that is really important as we think about the future of work and our role in it, in creating it. So the way that we collect that data is we have these devices that are installed above a doorway, and they actually emit this light that you can't see to be able to detect what's underneath it in the way that I described. So the images that I just shown you were what the device itself sees, those silhouettes, and then it's able to register how many people are entering and exiting, and it's all done through the cloud without any gateway required. And if you have specific questions on that, please, you can ask us, but we would love to talk you through that at a later point. Would love to talk through that if that piques your interest. So why is this all important? Well, once you understand how people and place are connected, and especially the way that we approach it, which is both anonymous and accurate, we then can feed into a whole slew of the workplace applications that are driving the future of work. And I think just at a high level here, if we wanted to summarize, there's these 3 points that we can walk away with. The first is that all roads begin with data. And what we mean by that is that there's been a surge in emphasis on not just qualitative data, but quantitative data about the environment. And we're seeing that surge across how the workplace and physical space is being managed and how it's connected to the people who use it. And so there's a mindset shift that's happening, and we're seeing it in front of our eyes. And it's just an appreciation for how data fits into that balancing act that is workplace experience and efficiency. The second is to start with a discrete project. I think one thing I've learned from working with a lot of these teams, they hear the buzzword utilization, AI, all of the sensors, all of that, and it gets very overwhelming. And then they spend a lot of time trying to decipher what might be helpful. And if you can start with a specific project, whether it's how many conference rooms, whether it's the real-time data, where it's how to manage your facilities, but specific problems that you have, and bring that forward and say, how could we make this better with data? Then that's where you start to see real wins and cases for ROI. We've seen, on that note, huge reductions in cost while also improving experience in terms of either consolidating space or making larger decisions. After all, this is all about decisions for resources that you have and how to allocate. And the last is that people are not ones and zeros. So we're moving towards a world of IoT, of all this promise of thinking about the world as in terms of ones and zeros and calculating it and being very quantitative in our approach to management of physical space. But at the end of the day, the workplace teams that I've met that have done the best are really bringing this hospitality edge to it as well. That thinking about people as people and what their needs are, and marrying that with the data that serves their largest decisions. And so reminding ourselves to not just think about from this new age of connected workplace does not mean losing the fact that these are humans spending their day at work. And the job of all of ours in terms of this world is to make their experience better in any way that we can. So on that note, I would love to open it up to some questions. And I will be fielding these here. Okay. So it looks like we have one question here about anonymity, and this idea of privacy in the workplace. So I think one thing that we've heard with that is that there is a larger conversation today about what data should workplaces have when they are trying to make these decisions, and why can't what is that line? And one thing that we've noted is that we've had multiple people come to us who were thinking about kind of taking an approach of a video camera, an optical sensor, and they found that their employees were very unhappy with it. The idea that they were being watched. And on that note, I actually did do a survey recently, a small survey with just 100 people, and we asked them, how would you feel about your employers installing video cameras to get this type of data to improve your workplace? And 75% of them said, I would not be comfortable with it, even if it was in the service of making my space better. And so our approach is that you need to collect data, but optical sensors, video cameras, surveillance, Big Brother is not the answer. There has to be an alternative, especially in the built environment. And as we're being mindful of the future of work, I think that's something that we have to remember. All right. Another question here. Can we get a copy of the presentation? Yes, we will send it over. And in terms of, okay, one sec, I'm just looking at these questions here. All right. Oh, okay. What do we do when there's multiple entrances to a room? Okay, so just pragmatically, again, if you have specific questions about our product, it would be great to get in touch. But the way it works is that each of those devices are installed in any entrance or exit to a space, and then they can calibrate and sync accordingly. And then let's see, we have a question here. Okay. Yeah. So what are some examples of quantifying the business value of implementing sensors? Yeah, I think that's a huge question here today, especially because if we think about all of the promise of technology, and it's almost like this widgetification, right? That everything could be solved if we just had the right data and the right sensors. And that's not really always the case. So some of the justifications that we've seen are about growth and consolidation. So companies are always either growing or shrinking, usually by headcount, if they're big enough. And that has a lot of impact on corporate real estate in their portfolio. So what that means is that when companies are growing, they're using this data before they move to see what are their actual requirements for how they're going to be using space. And then they save money because they're obviously going to be able to tailor their next space based on how they're using the current one. And then another thing that we're seeing more and more is around consolidation. We have a number of clients, actually several, surprisingly, I was surprised by in the Fortune 100, who are downsizing and as well as looking at flexible work. So we work in co-working spaces. 30% of real estate is estimated to be that by 2030. And so they're using this data to kind of understand, how do we want to structure our flexible work patterns? What are the locations that matter most in terms of this and have the most potential and opportunity for different types of work? All right. And then in terms of the cost, again, please get a hold of us in terms of the price. We can break down how that's structured in terms of access to the data. And I think that will be all for today. So it looks like we've gone through the questions, and if we have a couple more, we will follow up via email. And again, I want to thank all of you for your time here for just about 25 minutes of presentation. I know you guys are all busy and you've chosen to tune in here. But please, my personal goal here is to really understand how the future of work is changing and how data is a part of that change. So please feel free to get in touch and ask us any questions. My email is here, Rob's email is here. And really, we want to connect with you all in any way. And also, if you're interested in density, we can also help with that. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you so much for your time, and have a good rest of your week.